Hello, everyone. This is Professor Frank Plunkett from Pierce College. This is going to be part one of 3 parts for the lecture on Chapter 3. This lecture is based on a slide deck produced as part of Criminology, the 3rd edition by Frank Smaliger, Pearson Education publisher. So let's get started. So we're talking about this week are the biological perspectives on criminal behavior, specifically early biological perspectives. And there's a lot of really interesting items with that. I'm trying to share the screen right now. For some reason, it's a little sluggish. Oh, here we are. Okay. So that's our title. And that's me. So if you're taking the class right now with me, you should pull out your book and open up Chapter 3 so you can follow along with the book as well. And of course, you want to take good notes. I did post some additional materials in the doc sharing for the course, including a copy of the chapter with highlights and notes for you. As I understand, some of you have the 2nd edition and others have the 3rd edition. This lecture is based on the 3rd edition of the textbook, although there's not a whole lot of differences, although in this chapter they do refer to the next chapter, the Chapter 4, which is not included in the 2nd edition, but we will be providing you with that. So let's get started. What are our objectives? We want to describe the differences between historical biological and contemporary biosocial theories of crime. We're going to outline the basic principles of biological theories of crime, described early biological explanations of criminality. Some of that is extremely interesting. Explain how sociobiology views crime and demonstrate the importance of altruism, territoriality, and tribalism from that perspective. And of course, as always, we're going to look at some criticisms of the biological theories. So our first objective, looking at the historical and the differences between historical and contemporary. Historical biosocial theories or biological theories were very simplistic, and they tried to explain human behavior and crime. More contemporary ones are looking at genes, related biological features, and seeing them more as facilitators rather than determinants. So the big difference is in some of our early biological theories, they tended to suggest that one thing might be the cause of criminality or behavioral issues. Whereas in more contemporary biosocial theories, we're looking at biological issues, but seeing them as possibly related or assisting or predisposing people to criminal behavior, but not necessarily being the sole determinant of that behavior. And if you review some of the videos that I posted in the course and I talked about last night in our course update, you'll get some really good pictures of that. The Joel Rifkin video is really good. Adrian Rain, who's a professor from University of Pennsylvania, and his work on brain studies and the impact of damage or lack of function in certain parts of the brain is extremely interesting, and he does a much better job of telling you about it than I do. But he also did produce a book, which I told you about last night, called The Anatomy of Violence. Strongly suggest that if you're interested at all in criminology, that you take the time to read that. There is a copy available in our college library. So what are the basic principles of biological theories of crime? Well, you do have listed in your book in chapter 47 the key assumptions of biological theories of crime causation. And but we want to look at the basic principles. Biological theories focus on the brain. This is the center of your personality and major determinant in controlling human behavior. So biological theory suggested that it's going on in the brain. Unlike classical and neoclassical traditions, which considered free will and external forces as the cause of behavior, Biological theories look more inside, looking for it's coming from something that is within you. And we'll look at some interesting ideas there as well. Early biological theorists focused primarily on physical features and heredity as a source of criminal behavior. So we'll be talking about people who measured body parts, who looked at the bumps on the skull, and looking at so-called criminal families, all as being some kind of indicator of crime. Where contemporary biological theorists have taken a more in-depth look at human biology. Like I said, Adrian Raine is a great one to be looking at for some ideas. The Joel Rifkin video interviews, they interview Raine. They also interview a couple other scientists who are studying these theories. So what are some of those early biological explanations? Well, first of all, as we talked about last week, after the classical era, positivism rose up. Positivism was the scientific approach to the study of crime as its causation. So we're trying to look and say it's science, somehow scientifically based, and biological theorists looked more into the human body and the brain as the causal factor. There was something wrong with the body, something wrong with the brain. There were genes that were passed from one family member to the next and built this whole continuing group of people that committed crime. But they tried to study this in a scientific way. There's two principles of positivism. Acceptance of social determinism, or the belief that human behavior is determined not by free will, but by factors that are beyond control of the individual. Big thing. You're looking at this scientifically. In a positivist view, they were more geared towards there's some kind of cause that is not the person deciding to do something. It's something beyond their control. And they also were obviously very big on the application of scientific techniques to the study of crime and criminology. Now, that's not to say we associate scientific techniques with positivism, that using scientific techniques is a bad thing. We still use scientific techniques, but your more current biosocial look at crime is looking at biological issues in conjunction with environmental issues or things that are going on, whether it's being how things that happen to somebody in their environment cause changes in their brain, or how changes in the brain, whether they're genetic, passed along with issues in the brain, an injury, a disease process, may change how the person is able to properly process and make decisions, but not necessarily the sole cause. So you have a combination of free will where the person makes the final decision, but that ability to make that decision could be impacted by some biological issues. Auguste Comte, who lived from 1798 to 1857, wrote something called the System of Positive Polity. He proposed the use of scientific method. He believed social phenomena could be observed, explained, and measured in objective and qualitative terms. He is also considered the father of sociology. So he would be studying the things that are going on in the community around that impact people and maybe cause them to commit crimes. Franz Joseph Gall, he was the one who came up with something called phrenology, and you can see this nice little map, mind map that's here. Basically, you looked at the shape of the head to determine what might be happening as far as the human behavior. They also called it craniology. So the idea, as explained in the textbook, is that parts of the brain controlled different types of behavior. And if you can't read this map, and I don't believe there's one actually in the textbook to look at, but there's all kinds of them. If you do a Google search, phrenology, and look for images, you can clearly see that phrenologists, starting with Gall, believed that certain parts of the brain controlled certain types of behavior. What they also believed is that you could determine how the person might behave by feeling their skull, because they felt that those places that were more active would then have bumps in those areas. So they could actually feel your head and say, okay, there's a bump over here. This means that Frank is going to be a serial killer or something like that. You can see from the map what they believed happened in certain parts of the brain. 4 themes. Brain is the organ of the mind. We may hear that again later on. Particular aspects of personality are associated with specific locations, as I said. Portions of the brain that are well developed cause personality characteristics associated with them to be more prominent. The shape of the person's skull corresponds to the shape of the underlying brain and is therefore indicative of the personality. Bottom line, parts of the brain that were more developed had an impact on their behavior and also caused certain bumps in the skull, which could be read by touching from the outside, which would then tell you what that person's personality was like. Interesting concept. Unfortunately, was not correct. Spurzheim, he actually carried phrenology to the United States, and it gained prestige in the United States and was used to classify and evaluate newly admitted prisoners. So just imagine prisoners being brought into the penitentiary, whether it be Eastern State or some other facility around Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Delaware or wherever in the country, and having someone feel their head, find out where the bumps are. Maybe they got a little sheet where they write down, bump in this area, bump in that area. Maybe they had the map, and maybe you could X out where the issues were, and then that would be the classification. Prisoners going into our facilities now are classified based on a variety of issues, whether it's what kind of crime that they committed, whether they have gang affiliation. There's a whole host of things that corrections officials use to classify. Phrenology was used as one of those issues to classify prisoners because it was felt that we could determine what type of behavior that they would have. Czar Lombroso, he coined a term called atavism, said that criminality was the result of primitive urges that survived the evolutionary process. So basically what we're talking about is, think of Neanderthal man or something from way back, and they had certain urges, to eat, sleep, have sex, whatever it was. And Lombroso in atavism suggested that people that committed crimes never evolved or developed beyond those instinctive processes. And he was also called the father of modern criminology. Criminal anthropology is a study of the relationships between human physical characteristics and criminality. So again, we're looking at physical characteristics. It might be the size of the earlobes, the size or the width of the nose, how big someone's hands are, how long their arms are. Basically looking at physical characteristics and suggesting that people with those characteristics are going to be criminal or more likely to be involved with crime. So basically, if you look at what Lombroso is saying, that people are basically born criminals. Now, there were other people that he called criminaloids, who were occasional criminals, who were pulled in based upon environmental influences. So he acknowledged that although he felt that there were people that were born criminals, that there were also some people that were influenced by their environment that may occasionally commit crimes. Charles Buckman Goring, he evaluated Lombroso's thesis, had a very detailed study of English convicts. In 1913 is when it was published. And what he found was there really wasn't a basis for Lombroso's thesis. He felt it was not accurate. He used a newly developed but advanced mathematical techniques to measure the degree of correlation between physiological features in criminal history, examined 3,000 inmates in the prison system. And basically his determination was the whole fabric of Lombrosian doctrine, judged by the standards of science, is fundamentally unsound. Constitutional theories. Again, we're looking at body types, genetics, or external physical characteristics. Kretschmer proposed that there was a relationship between body build and personality type. William Sheldon used measurement techniques to connect body types to personality. You'll find a picture, there's one on the next slide coming up, but you'll also find one in your book. In edition 3, it's on page 49. He said there were 4 basic body types, and that which was called a mesomorph was more likely to be criminal. And we see from this slide that our mesomorph was athletic and muscular, and those people, therefore, were more likely to commit crimes. I think what we can all probably figure out today is, depending upon the crime, maybe these guys have the tools. They're more likely to be the ones out committing strong arm robberies, maybe be able to climb into windows and break into houses and those types of things, because they're more powerful, they're more athletic, and have the ability. But you know that the variety of crimes that occur in our society, anybody can commit one. It just so happens that violent crimes, maybe the athleticism makes it easier for those folks. Does that mean that every person who's athletic is going to wind up being a criminal? Are all of our football players, basketball players, baseball players, hockey players, are they all criminals? No. But those that are going to commit violent crimes tend to have those tools. So this is what Sheldon's idea was that you had these body types, and a mesomorph being more likely to commit crimes. Genetics in crime. Basically, genetics in crime, is suggested that these things were inherited. People were more likely to commit crimes because they were passed down from one person to the next. Now, what came out of that? You had the study of the Duke family, which was basically a long line of people that were involved in criminality. Again, this starts on page 49. Sir Francis Galton is the first scientist to systematically study heredity, and he wrote, "The perpetuation of a criminal class by heredity is a question difficult to grapple with on many accounts. It is, however, easy to show that the criminal nature tends to be inherited." And he goes on, and you can read that on page 50 in the book. A guy by the name of Dugdale published a study of the Duke family, which he described as criminogenic by nature. A guy named Estabrook followed up on his study, identified additional descendants, including prostitutes, paupers, and various types of criminal offenders. So Dugdale and Estabrook was looking at this Duke family, and it had a high percentage of criminal types or other people that might not be, your most upstanding citizens, and therefore they suggested that criminality was inherited. Henry Herbert Goddard studied the Kallikak family, which is an interesting story. You had a Revolutionary War soldier by the name of Martin Kallikak. He had a sexual liaison with a barmaid whose name was unknown, and he had an illegitimate son, Martin Jr., and then after the war, he returned home and married a righteous Quaker girl. Now, what basically they had down, you have 2 lines extending from this one man, Martin Kallikak. And the line with the The barmaid, who has been on numerous occasions called feeble-minded, which was a term of the day, which basically would be similar to being mentally handicapped or mentally challenged. And what they found that there was a high incidence of people with those mental issues in that line of people extending from Kallikak and the barmaid, where they didn't have as high a percentage in his liaison with his wife, the Quaker girl. What Goddard concluded was that there was a tendency towards feeble-mindedness that was inherited, but criminality was not. It's very important to realize that he really did not suggest that criminality was passed along, because he didn't have the evidence. But what is important to realize that he suggested that some traits could be passed along from one member of the family to the other. And some of these issues, looking at the possibility of families passing along criminal tendencies or mental health tendencies, led to something called the eugenics movement. The eugenics movement basically suggested that we should stop people who are part of these families that are passing along these bad traits. We should stop them from reproducing. And there were actually some states back in the 1920s, and you look up the case of Buck versus Bell, case where the state said we could do something about bad families and not allow them to continue. So what you had is a Virginia statute that permitted sterilization. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote in the decision in that it's better for all the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for a crime or let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those persons who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. And eugenics continued for many years in England, United Kingdom, into the 60s, with people believing that we should identify bad genes and then not allow those people to reproduce. Imagine today the consequences of looking, well, you have 5 criminals in your family, we shouldn't allow you to have any more kids. And I've heard people suggest that, but I really don't think it's would fly too well. So this concludes part 1, the early biological explanations. We will continue with part 2 with some more modern biological explanations. And we're doing it this way so that maybe if the videos are shorter, you actually watch the entire thing. You're going to watch maybe just as much, but they're in chunks, easier, and the way it's broken down. So I'll try to put that in the description of the video so people understand what's in this video. All right, so I'll see you for part 2 in a little bit. And remember, if you have any questions, you have any issues, you need anything, don't hesitate to call or write or whatever. We have lots of ways for you to reach out. Thank you.